The Fresh Economic Thinking Podcast. New ideas and analysis with Dr. Cameron Murray and Jonathan Gadir.
Hi Cameron, how you going? Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Let's get into 2025.
Yes, indeed. And it's just about something I want to ask you regarding one of your Fresh Economic Thinking pieces from December. You wrote it with Aziz Sundarji, and the headline was The Five Economic Forces of Housing Markets.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that confused me when I was reading this and really led me to wanting to kind of grill you on this was the one about where do rents come from?
Okay.
And so first of all, now I'm sure that you thought about this, but because you're a thoughtful person, but it's not in the article, which is you talk about rent as like a price that comes from all these market forces. And, you know, as incomes rise, households move to a bigger home or reduce the number of people per household and blah, blah, blah. But you didn't mention that rent is not the same as other goods and services because having a roof over your head is not the same as, I don't know, buying an ice cream. It's the prerequisite for survival. It's a prerequisite for every other spending that you do, and you're functioning in society. So I would have thought that rent can't easily be just thrown in with other goods and services. I would have thought that landlords have a lot more flexibility than other producers of goods and services to increase the price because, hey, what are you going to do? Homelessness?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't disagree that housing is a necessity and that you know, as household incomes fall, we generally you know, we'll tighten up our belts when it comes to international travel and luxury items much more than we will in terms of paying the rent. That's definitely true, but I think the distinction here between sort of understanding where rents come from and this hierarchy of needs is that at the margin, an extra unit of housing or you know, moving the better suburb over or getting a place with an extra bathroom or, you know, not sharing with four people in the apartment, but with three, those increments of housing are just as unnecessary as, you know, luxury holidays abroad. So we can trade off the increment with the increment of other spending on goods and services. So that's what economists would say is, you know, the basis of marginal analysis. It's not that housing as a total block we can think of as, you know, being optional, but the marginal change on what we spend on housing is quite optional, right? And it's those marginal changes that are what leads to rising rents and other adjustments in household size in the country. So I think, you know, both can be true. It's just a matter of at the margin, it's not, you know, how extra bit of housing is just as luxurious as anything else. But yes, as a block, yeah, you kind of have to spend something on housing. Does that make sense, or have I?
It
Is it
does
still
make sense.
confusing?
And no, yeah, that makes sense. I guess what it points or what it reveals is that my problem is not with doing marginal economic analysis. My problem is with the whole idea of looking at housing, treating housing as an asset or as just a good and service, which is what we've been doing through our tax system and all that. I have a problem with that. I have an objection to that. It's a place to live and it should be treated like that. And the laws should be around property as a place to live, as a human right, as a prerequisite for your functioning as a human being. So yeah, I guess that's where the problem comes from. It doesn't come from me going, oh yeah, once we have a system set up which treats property as an asset like any other asset and doesn't really care about human rights, then yeah, we talk about the trading, you know,
Yeah.
the
Well,
trade-offs that you make.
let me be clear though that we can also provide housing via income right? So, our welfare system is designed not to supply food for people. So in the US, there are food stamp programs and certain things. We just go, oh, if you need food, we just give you money. That's how we ensure everyone gets enough food. And we can do that with sort of housing too. The difference really is this sort of Tim Helm uses a good phrase called the tournament economy of housing. It basically says, well, in a tournament, in a race, there's one first place, one second place, one third place. And if you give someone money, you can push them up the positions in the race, but you're going to push someone down because every location of every home is relatively better or worse than the others. So all the housing has this rank order to it in terms of its quality, in terms of location and size. And so with housing, it's a little bit trickier because we give people all this money and we just basically compress up the final places in the queue, if you know what I mean, the final positions in the race, we just make them much closer together than might otherwise be the case. But it's certainly the case you can ensure that housing is a necessity or a human right and provide that by income and let people use that income to get a minimum standard of housing or share with people or move to a different city or however people choose to be housed, just like we do for food. I guess my general view is that the location stability is something different with housing. So maybe we should have some non-market options for people because they have money, if their suburb goes up in rent 50%, that stability of not having to move 10 suburbs out to find somewhere to live has a huge intangible value as well. So I think that is maybe where the big difference is that you can buy more or less food at the same supermarket, or you can buy home brand or fancy stuff. But with housing, sometimes to save money or to be housed with less money, you have to actually move and disrupt many aspects of your life, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so then we get to the bit where I was like, "What the hell is he talking about?" So this is like,
Okay.
I'll quote you. I'll quote you to yourself, or to, I guess, I don't know if it was you or Aziz who wrote this paragraph. Another insight from the rental equilibrium. So the equilibrium is, about ability,
I'll
the
explain it maybe
preceding.
after the
All
quote.
right, go
Yeah.
for it. Yeah. Do you want me to read
Yeah.
the whole thing? Yeah.
Yeah,
Another
read the whole
ins
thing. Yeah.
Another insight from the rental equilibrium is that inflation in non-housing goods means that renter households can pay more for rent because that means giving up fewer other goods and services for an extra quantity or quality of housing. And I was like, what? What? For This is the opposite of what many people might expect. Some might think that if goods and services have risen in price, then households have less left over for rent. Well, yeah. So rents should fall when there is inflation. This is wrong. Okay. Go and explain this.
Okay. Yeah. So, like everything, you read it back to yourself and you think, I should have written that a lot better. Okay. So, let's start with what's the rental equilibrium? So, here's the thing. Why aren't rents 25% cheaper than what they are? Like they were 25% cheaper 10 years ago. Why aren't they now? What's pushing them up? Because almost every house is the same as it was, right? There was pretty much 10.5 million homes. Now there's 11 million. That's not much of a change over a long period of time. And here's the question. If rents were 20% cheaper compared to today, then people would say, hey, look how relatively cheap rent is compared to bananas, cars, petrol, whatever, clothes. I'm going to spend less on clothes, food, petrol, whatever, and more on rent because the relative benefit per dollar is higher. So the value I get of an extra unit or an increment of housing, whether that's moving to a better suburb or getting a place with an extra bathroom or an extra garage or an extra bedroom, that increment is now relatively cheaper because the price of other goods and services has gone up. Does that make sense? So I'm giving up fewer other things to get that. So what will happen is rents will rise until such time as the marginal person, that's basically the renter that's moving now, or the number of renters in that market active, is saying, well, hey, what I'm giving up now in terms of other goods and services is too much to spend more on rent. So that extra dollar of rent, I'm not going to pay that because I'm giving up now 3 bananas, 10 liters of petrol, and whatever else. And so this equilibrium is this trade-off between spending more on rent to get a better home or more on other goods and services to get better whatever else is in your life. Okay, so now imagine a situation. Maybe I should give you a numerical example so we can put some numbers to this, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
So let's just say you've got $100 a week household income and you spend, let's just say, typically a renter spends 20% of their income on housing. So let's say you spend $80 on bananas. So you buy $81 bananas and you
Are you sure
spend,
it's 20 and not like 35?
that's right. It's 20. No, this is the thing. For some people, it's much higher. I should share a graph when we publish this podcast, but the mean and the median have been around 20%. If we survey just renter households, their incomes and what they're paying, it's been 20% on average in the 2016 census, in the 2011 census, in the 2006 census, in the 1991 census. And in fact, if you go back into 1911, when New South Wales had their first inquiry into rising rents in Sydney, if you read the evidence there, they sort of estimate that it's around 20% is rent as a share of household income for renter households as well. So this is pretty much a
That's
flat
household.
line.
So if you happen to be a single person, then it could be 40%.
It could be. It could be 40% if you're like a group of students as well, sharing a place, right? And temporarily just paying a premium to live near the university, or whatever the case may be. It might be 40% if you're an age pensioner and your household income is the age pension plus some rent assistance, and your suburb has just boomed and you don't want to move because you're so entrenched there. So there are definitely people who pay more, but there are a lot of people who pay less. And so when we take that total distribution, we find that in the middle, it's around 20%. And
Okay.
it's been pretty flat, not just in Australia either. If you look at Canadian census, and I've got these charts up on Fresh Economic Thinking, there's a tab there that's called charts, would you believe? And if you scroll down a little, you'll see rent to income ratios flat in Australia, flat in Canada, flat in the US since the 80s, flat in the UK since the end of the 1970s for market renters. So that's quite interesting, right? So why are there all these flat lines? And I guess the trick is here, if rents came down relative to the price of other goods, we would substitute our spending away from those goods, those say 80 bananas we buy for $1 each. If the price of housing dropped, we'd take our money and go, oh, now I have to give up fewer bananas for an extra bit of house or moving an extra suburb. So I'll do that. It essentially decreases the price. Does that make sense? So when the price of a non-housing consumer good goes up, right, and the price of housing rent stays the same, that actually decreases the amount of goods I have to give up to spend an extra dollar on housing. Because instead of
Okay.
the banana, okay.
Let me just first of all, you haven't mentioned like that's not really how it works. Like it's not about bananas versus rent. It's about I've got X dollars income every week,
Mhm.
and it doesn't matter like if I divide up my non-housing goods and services that I buy, in this way or that way. I just know what I've got left over at the end of the week.
Oh, so why don't you fix what you spend on housing and have less left over for those other food and goods and services? Because
Okay, okay. Well, I might.
do you have in mind the idea that you've got this income and all the goods and services except housing have gone up because of inflation, and you've bought the same amount of those, and now you've got less left over for housing at the
Well,
end,
maybe I haven't bought the same amount of that. Hang on,
even if
let me
you've
just
bought
get to the
fewer
bottom
of
of
them.
let me just.
Okay.
Is this based on, someone's done a survey of how people spend and have gone, oh, we've noticed a pattern here, or like, is it like surveys of what people say they do? Like, what is this based on?
Well, okay, we'll start with the
Or is this
survey
just a model
evidence.
that an economist came up with and wrote in a
Um,
journal article?
so this is basically, these are well-known they're called substitution and income effects, right? This is pretty well-known economics, but let me give you some more details. So in Australia, we have a thing called the Survey of Income and Housing. Don't know how many people are in it now, but I think there were around 6,800 people took the survey in 2003-4, which is sort of the last time I had the unit record files of the individual level data. And basically, they get them to track everything they spend in multiple 2-week periods throughout a year. And so you get this household, you get this representative spending basket for a household, right? And what you can do is over time, yes, different households rotate into that survey, but you can see their incomes rise and what they spend on different things over time. And the plot, so you can plot the income on the x-axis and the amount of spending on a particular type of good and service on the y-axis, right? And if you've got a straight line, then we call that a normal good, right? So the line itself is called an Engel curve after, I think his name's Friedrich Engels. I'm going to search that.
As in
But
the co-author of Karl Marx.
yeah, pretty sure Engel curve. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, no, Ernst Engel. They're named after German
Yeah, I
statistician
was thinking
Ernst.
that didn't sound
No,
right.
no, no,
Yeah.
no. This is a German statistician, Ernst Engel, who lived 1821 to 1896. And he did a lot of statistical research on the Berlin. He was the director of the statistical department. Right, so different Engel.
Okay. No, well,
And
one's
basic
Engel and one Engels, plural. Yeah.
ah, so the Engel curves are basically, we look at how much do people spending on different categories of good rise or fall as their incomes rise. And housing pretty much is a straight line. So if our income doubles, we spend twice as much on housing. So we spend the same proportion. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because housing is not just one attribute good. It's not just a roof. It's a roof and it's an air conditioner and it's a bathroom and it's a garage and it's a location and it's a garden and it's all these. It's a bundle of services that's quite a large proportion of the stuff that's useful in your life. And so that stuff is roughly a fixed percentage at 20%. So it's a straight line. So the Engel curve straight, and we call that a normal good. Now, if the Engel curve sort of goes up and then comes down, so you spend more of your income on it as it rises, but then when you get kind of rich, you spend less. And the classic economic one is like 2-minute noodles or rice. You're super poor, you spend more on those goods until you get rich enough where you stop buying them altogether, right? You totally replace them with other things. And then there's luxury goods where you don't spend any on international flights until you get to a certain income, and then you spend a decent chunk. And it just so happens that if you look at the statistical data for Australia, for most countries, you see pretty much this normal good Engel curve relationship, which basically says people spend a fixed budget share on housing. It's totally the most normal of normal goods. And for that to hold, we basically has to be that if there is inflation in non-housing goods, um, people will have to substitute their spending towards housing to such a degree that it causes inflation in housing to an equal degree, so that the relative prices of rent and other goods stay roughly fixed. And that's pretty much the end of it. Like, I think the alternative view, which I think people maybe have in mind but haven't really articulated is that you have a fixed income budget. The price of non-housing goods goes up. So instead of spending $80 on it, you're spending $90 on it, right? And now you've only got $10 left for housing. Therefore, if everyone's running around with only $10 to spend on renting housing instead of 20, then the rents will come down. The problem there is the price of rents is now like, instead of, one banana for 1 unit of housing, now the price of rent is like one banana for 3 units of housing. And that what we say that can't be an equilibrium, right? Because you were giving up one banana for 1 unit, and now you only have to give up one banana for 3 units. Well, everyone's just going to give up bananas and buy houses because they're getting 3 times more per banana that they're giving up. They're getting a lot more. And so the inflation has to transmit through the markets so that the rental price of housing rises roughly at the same rate as other inflation in the economy. And if you look long term, you can actually see that the CPI housing rent inflation component pretty much matches CPI over the cycle. So when it's some periods, it's sort of rising faster than other goods and services. And then some periods, it's sort of rising slower. So the early 2010s, CPI was, the inflation in housing was faster than the inflation in other goods and services. And then 2015 to 2020, CPI, the price index for housing, was below the inflation index for other goods and services. And so if you look over sort of a 10 or 20-year period, housing rent is literally just sort of CPI. A little bit more because of rising incomes, right? But we don't really quality adjust as well. That's another issue. So that's sort of, inflation means rising rents, not falling rents, because we don't allocate our budget to a fixed amount of non-housing goods first and then have less left over. We actually balance off, slightly better house, slightly worse house, slightly more other goods, slightly less other goods, so that trade-off, that price at the margin is roughly the same.
But yeah,
confusing, or have I made it worse or made it better?
No, you haven't made it worse. I'm just dissatisfied with it because
Okay.
surely rents play by different rules in that in the real world, if regardless of whether the environment is inflationary or not inflationary, it's very difficult and I put a very high premium on not having to move.
Mm-hmm.
And I put a very high premium on not having a reduction in my quality of life as well. And it's almost impossible, like, if you've got a car, to downgrade to someplace without a car park, or if you've got, equipment for your work that you need. You know what I mean? Like, you can't easily go from 2-bedroom to one, or from whatever, 1 bedroom to a studio. It's not an easy thing to do. Like, it's not. It just plays by different rules. It's not. Yeah, okay. In an inflationary environment, yeah, I'll probably wear a downgrade in my in my non-household spending in order to stay where I am. But we're staying where I am, the rent goes up not because of some rule about people thinking in terms of like unit price of non-household, but it goes up because 50,000 Irish have just arrived in Randwick. And they're the ones who want to live together, five guys in a flat, and they can pay more than I can. That's the factor.
Yeah, I mean, that is a factor, right? So they've got more incomes that they're trying to spend on the same amount of housing, just as if everyone got a pay rise, right? So you can either have more people with the same amount of income each, or the same amount of people with more income each, and the net effect
Well,
on
they've got less
pricing.
income, but they're just willing to live 5 people to a flat.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they arrive much faster than the stock of housing can adjust, like if we're talking inflation, we're talking a short-term period where we can't really match the change in demand with additional, new homes, right? Which is how you get inflation in every sector, right? Everyone's trying to get to the front of a queue to buy something in a hurry, and prices go up. But your point there about housing being different because, there's an expense, a sort of large expense from moving house. It's very different to going to the supermarket and choosing a different brand next time, right? That's free. It's free to make a change. Whereas houses, it probably costs 2 or 3 grand to move minimum. There is bonds to deal with. There are housemates to deal with sometimes. Yeah, as you say, cars, extra transport costs. But here's the thing about at the margin, not everyone has to move, right? Only a few people need to move to set the price. Just like when the Apple shares or Commonwealth Bank shares go up and down in price, hardly anyone actually traded those shares to make the price of the whole market move. And it's true too that renters churn every 2 years on average. So, it's between a third and a half of renters move every year. This is a small pool of long-term renters and then a large pool of renters that turn over very regularly. So even if it's costly for those long-term people to move, the fact that some people will be moving anyway all the time allows these adjustments to happen pretty quickly. And my other point is renters don't have to think about the trade-offs at the margin. They don't have to go, oh, well, here I'm giving up 2/3 of a new holiday for an extra bathroom in my house. And at the other place, I was giving up half of an extra whatever. This is an emergent property of the trial and error of many, many people making many, many choices. Because remember, this is just the average. The average is 20% of household income. In fact, no one's going to pay 20.0%, probably. Everyone's going to be along that curve somewhere. And through those changes, it just so happens that average happens to stay where it is and people move up and down that distribution.
I think I've diagnosed the issue here, and that is that I want to be having a different discussion from the one that you're having in this article, because I think, and like that's essentially my problem, not your problem. You're having a discussion about equilibrium, that's fine. And I'm thinking like, yeah, but why do people move at this rate every 1 to 2 years when in other countries people stay for much longer? It's because of the laws they have in place that make it possible for people to stay where they are for much longer. And our rental market is incredibly skewed, towards the rights of the landlord, and like I said, basically, it's a different discussion. It's what sets the rules. You're analyzing like a micro thing, and I'm going, yeah, but why is it like that? Why can't it be better?
Well, it's true that even if the average tenure of a tenant was twice as long, that the same effect of inflation in non-housing goods would flow through to housing, which it has in many countries of Europe, which do have those stability of tenure rules and those, the German rule is they have a local price index for rents, and every landlord can only increase up to that level unless they make capital improvements. But that price level itself starts getting feedbacks from the price rises in other parts of the economy, right? And so, the same thing happens, but more slowly. And I've actually proposed we should maybe slow down these adjustments in the rental market. That in fact, yes, the adjustment's going to happen, but the speed at which it happens is itself costly, right? So if you have 50% increase in rents, like we've seen at the Gold Coast in 2 years, that is actually worse than a 50% increase in 4 years, even though it's a 50% increase, because the rate at which the rent changes, the slower the rate, the more benefit for the tenant to be able to adjust by working more, adjusting, getting a new, housemate, whatever the case may be. And so I've actually proposed that if you want to control the rents, you should be thinking about it as a speed limit on adjustment, like the German style, where there's a maximum rate, so that those very disruptive shocks are less disruptive, but you can still get your total rental rise. You just have to smooth it out over multiple periods. And what's really interesting is in a lot of states, so I think Queensland and New South Wales for sure, the land tax paid by landlords, right, is based on the land value. And because land values sometimes rise 50% in 1 year, and instead of just increasing everyone's land tax 50%, we average the land value over the last 3 years, so that if your land value rises 50%, you don't pay 50% more land tax. You only pay sort of 1/6 more, because we're dividing that 50% by 3 each year for 3 years. We're smoothing that 50% jump out over 3 subsequent years, because we think big cash flow shocks like that are disruptive to landlords. And so, yeah, it's the speed of adjustment issue, I think, has some merit. And in the Great Housing Hijack, I propose that, hey, guys, if it's good enough for landlords to smooth out these rapid changes, it's probably good enough for tenants. Because, yes, we can't really stop the rental market getting to this equilibrium point, but during periods of sudden rapid change, maybe we can slow it down and make life easier for everyone who's trying to adjust. Does that sort of get more towards your point?
Yeah, no, that's a great way of looking at it, and that's a fantastic explanation. I think I'm a bit less befuddled now. That's good. Yeah.
I'm glad I could clear something up for you. I'll try and write it better the first time. next article.
Very good. All right. Well, that's a great first podcast for 2025 for us too. Thanks very much for doing that explanation, and catch you soon.
All right. Talk again soon. Bye, mate.